Today we have on the college dropout whose first marvellous car was a Maserati. This extraordinary gentleman used a helicopter and generators to power a Bitcoin mining setup. The honourable host is Simply Bitcoin, the dedicated director of content strategy for Swan, the founding father of bitvolt, host at Bitcoin 2023, committed wholeheartedly to Bitcoin in 2016. Nico Moran, a truly terrific privilege to host you in the house today. When you rally the troops, you speak this truth. If you're against toxic Bitcoin maximalism, you're against Bitcoin. If you're against Bitcoin, you're against freedom. Can you break down and unpack what this means for us?
Yeah, that was a line that I said during Bitcoin 2021. It was the first Bitcoin conference I spoke at, and it was on the main stage. So I had no experience speaking in public and whatever. There was 2,000 people in the audience, and it was absolutely terrifying. I was backstage with Ross Ulbrich's mom, and I remember going up to Alex Gladstein, and I didn't know him at the time, and I went up to him and I said, man, like, you know, I've never really done this before. And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, not that many people have. And he just walked away. And then I was like, holy cow, this is serious. And then, you know, I prepared like a crazy person. And when I went on stage, something took over and, you know, I was ready to go, but I did a lot of preparation, and some part of that preparation was preparing that statement. If you're against Bitcoin maximalism, you're against Bitcoin. If you're against Bitcoin, you're against freedom. And that stems from a book called Rules for Radicals. And the idea, the philosophy behind that phrase was for that phrase to be unattackable on a social level. So like, think about it. Like, so you're against Bitcoin. Oh, so you're against freedom. It's like, no, I'm not against freedom. Yes, you are, because you said you're against Bitcoin. So it naturally puts anyone who attacks that phrase on a defensive footing. And if you're on a defensive footing, it takes a lot more energy to refute whatever is being claimed than the opposite. To my surprise, it went viral on the internet. It was quoted by the Financial Times. And Eric Voorhees, who's pretty well known, it's a bit into altcoins and stuff. He went on stage right after me and he said whoever said that was wrong, and he got a giant boo from the audience. So I kind of had a feeling that that line was gonna resonate with people just based on, you know, I love political philosophy and all that stuff. I just didn't know to what extent it was gonna pop off the way it did.
Yeah. When you say Bitcoin's against freedom, obviously CBDCs and stuff are a really big talking point lately. Is that why you believe Bitcoin's freedom for humanity, to stop the tyranny of the Fed? Or how does Bitcoin provide freedom in each individual's life?
The way that I've been phrasing it is Bitcoin or slavery. And I asked Beauty on, who is the founder of Azteco. I had the privilege to interview him backstage at BitBlock Boom. And I said to him, like, look, what do you think about Bitcoin or slavery? And he said, it's not Nico, it's not Bitcoin or slavery, it's Bitcoin or death. So you took it even a level above what I said. And it's not how it could be construed as a hyperbolic statement, but it's not. And it kind of borrows from the political philosophy of if you're against Bitcoin, you're against freedom. It is an absolute statement where for you to attack that, you can't really find a good angle, because it's like, oh, I am against Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean I'm for slavery. And then it's like, but yes, you are, because you would support central bank digital currencies, because that's where governments are taking this, whether it's the United States, whether it is whether it's anywhere. Most like G20 nations are doing a massive push for central bank digital currencies, and they're being very hostile towards Bitcoin. And with central bank digital currencies comes social controls. And with social controls comes the ability to have a forcing function on society without direct coercion. Meaning, like in China, if you misbehave or if you talk bad about the government, They, take points off the social credit system, and all of a sudden you're not allowed to travel. All of a sudden your kids are not allowed to go to the best schools. All of a sudden they might just take money directly out of your bank account. So people naturally behave and self-censor because they care about like their family. They have to feed their family, right? So it ultimately becomes this controlling function over society. And it's just not only the West. This is happening. It's not only in China. It is happening all over the West. Like, this is something that's happening in the United States and Europe. They're really pushing hard for these central bank digital currencies. So yes, it is Bitcoin or slavery. Bitcoin meaning freedom, prosperity, opportunity, optimism about the future, versus slavery, central bank digital currencies, nihilism, poverty, control, censorship. It's really those two options. It's a little bit obfuscated right now, but as time progresses and governments, end cash and push harder and harder for these CBDCs because they don't want to let go of being able to create money for free that everyone else has to work for, people are going to have to choose what life they want for themselves and what life they want for their children.
Yeah. A couple of things that you touched on. Here in Australia, we've had a CBDC pilot that went quote unquote successfully for them, which is scary. There's some rumors that it comes out implemented not for retail but for bank to bank in October. But then we always hear about this like 2030 agenda, with the 3-letter agencies. Do you buy into that these people are the people trying to take over the world and put us into that slave fiat system of control? Or is it just each individual country will do its own thing with CBDCs, and wherever you live, they'll implement their own things? Or is there a global elite overlooking everyone and trying to have like a one world order or a new world order and that 2030 narrative?
So I don't believe that these world leaders and the World Economic Forum, or I call the Quintillaire Conference, or the United Nations, or the IMF, I don't necessarily think that those people are sitting at big desks, twirling their mustaches, smoking cigars, and saying, ha ha ha, we're going to take over the world. Like maybe Charles Schwab, other than him. I think a lot of people that work in those organizations, they're just trying to pay their bills like the rest of us. They're trying to pay their mortgages. What you're seeing is a disalignment of incentives. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing an incentive structure that's disaligned. And because it's disaligned, you're getting these results. Like, broken money ensures the centralization of power by stealing the productivity through inflation, right? So obviously those in power must control the messaging, must control society in order to remain in power. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a disaligned incentive model where a bureaucratic elites, an elite few, benefit from that system. So they are going to act out of their own self-interest in order to protect that system because it's done well for them. But this is where Bitcoin shines. Bitcoin is a aligned incentive structure system, meaning Michael Saylor acting out of his own self-interest and greed is actually making Bitcoin stronger. Therefore, he's actually making me wealthier. He's actually making Bitcoin stronger. Therefore, my stack grows with it too, right? So I don't think it's that necessarily that these G20 nations and all that stuff, like they're inherently evil and they're inherently like, scheming and planning and whatever. I think you're just seeing a lot of smart people acting out of their own self-interest in a system of misaligned incentives. Therefore, they're hurting everyone else, even if they think they're doing what's good for everyone else. I truly believe a lot of them believe that. They're actually hurting everyone else. So it's an architectural problem. I don't think it's a people problem per se. Yep. Maybe there's definitely a couple evil individuals. You can make the argument like Charles Schwab, like that guy, like you can make the argument that he's evil. But I don't think that the majority of these people that work in these governments or in these institutions are necessarily inherently evil and want to take over the world. I think that the incentive structure and the architecture, it incentivizes them to do that. And that's how people perceive it, right? A lot of conspiracy theories get plugged in, and even though some of these theories might end up being true, I think people misunderstand why they're acting the way they're acting, right? And it all boils down to a very simple thing. It's broken money. You want to fix the issue, fix the money, you fix the world. And I think all of that gets better.
Yep. So in saying that, would it be fair to say if globally, if we're on a Bitcoin standard, if those people were doing what they're doing instead of on a fiat system, but on a Bitcoin system, it'd just work out better for everyone? Like they wouldn't really need to change how they're acting, just the system that they're acting in would naturally benefit everyone else instead of the select few?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, it's not a coincidence that El Salvador, that made Bitcoin legal tender, and you have Nayib Bukele as president. It's not a coincidence that that country, the elected leader, has a 92% approval rating and actually is doing the things that he said he was going to do if elected. That is not a coincidence. They fixed the base layer of society. They made the base layer of society sound money. Therefore, you have a society with an aligned incentive structure. Therefore, all of a sudden, it benefits Nayib Bukele for doing the right thing for himself, but it also benefits the people, right? And this movement is just beginning. You have Javier Milei of Argentina that has a really good shot at winning the presidential primary. He had an interview with Tucker Carlson. Not only did he identify the issues with central banking and fiat money, but also he was talking about issues about the fiat system and how it currently runs that really resonated with people, to the point that it was the most watched interview. I think it's like, last time I checked, it's like 400 million in like views and engagement. Wow. That's more than the Donald Trump interview that Tucker did with Donald Trump, right? So that tells you, and that song that went viral, Richmond North of Richmond, which was referring to the corruption of Washington, D.C., right? The city Richmond, north of Richmond, is Washington, D.C., and in that song, it's literally talking about how these Richmond, north of Richmond in Washington, D.C. are trying to control me, right? And Javier Milei, his interview went viral. That song went viral. People are understanding and they're waking up to the fact that there's something inherently wrong with the system. It's our job as Bitcoiners to really direct them to the fact that it's not right or left. It's not Republican versus Democrat here in the United States, not conservative versus liberal. It's the party of orange, the party of Bitcoin, peace, prosperity, opportunity, versus the party of green, central bank, digital currencies, nihilism, poverty, slavery, censorship, right? Like, that is the battle at hand, and it's happening, and we're winning, and they're freaking terrified. They just censored Russell Brand. The UK Parliament wrote it's nuts, dude. They wrote a letter to Rumble, and they said, Rumble, you have to demonetize this guy for allegations that haven't been proven. They're terrified of what the internet has enabled. The internet has disintermediated states. It has disintermediated these institutions that have been living in a world where they've had a total monopoly on information and money.
Yeah.
So they've been able to control the narrative for the longest time. And then all of a sudden the internet comes along. It gives individuals the ability to communicate directly with each other, like we're doing right now, instantaneously, thousands of miles away. So governments can't co-opt the narrative anymore with the internet. And then to add fuel to the fire, you have Bitcoin that comes along. And now all of a sudden individuals like you and I have the ability to opt out of government money also. Yeah. So we're opting out of government information and we're opting out of government money at the same time, and they're freaking the F out. They don't know what to do. They're like, disinformation, hate speech, terrorism, all the words that you can think of, they're throwing at us, hoping something sticks. The problem is that the more they say that and it doesn't come true, the less impactful those words mean, like the less impactful those words have, and the more people stop believing in them, and that's what's happening. That's what has them freaked out. But hey, look, we're winning. I think we're going to continue winning because Bitcoin's incentives are better. And I think freedom wins. I think a human being naturally wants freedom, right? When the Berlin Wall when the Berlin Wall was up, you didn't see people fleeing West Germany into East Germany. You saw people fleeing East Germany to West Germany because they wanted freedom. In Cuba, which is right next to where I live in Miami, you have people risking their lives getting on a balsa, a raft, to hopefully cross the 90-mile strait to reach Miami so that they can come to America where they have freedom, right? So this is what's happening right now. And these governments that have been used to having this total control are losing it, and they're freaking out because of it.
Yeah. I'm with you there, Nick. I think truth will always prevail, maybe not straight away, but eventually the truth will always shine forth. What about with what BlackRock's going on with their spot ETF and stuff? Ultimately, is that good or bad for Bitcoin? Is that a way to be able to control Bitcoin? They've put in a couple of clauses there where they'll go with the longest chain. They're happy to hard fork.
So I don't know. I think that what I was talking about, like the Bitcoin is interesting, and Preston Pish was talking about this the other day, and I forget who else. It was Alex Gladstein wrote an article. Bitcoin is a Trojan horse for freedom, also. Yeah. And Bitcoin is very interesting. The reason Bitcoin is really interesting is because you are more incentivized to play by the rules than you are to cheat. And in the fiat system, you're more incentivized to cheat than to play by the rules. So even this like ogre, like terrible, like BlackRock, people are like, holy shit, it's BlackRock. I would not be surprised that it's not BlackRock that will change Bitcoin. It's Bitcoin that will change BlackRock. Max Kaiser has that really famous quote, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And I've seen that happen in my life. I've seen that happen in the country of El Salvador. I've seen that happen to MicroStrategy. Why is BlackRock any different? They're more incentivized to play by Bitcoin's rules on a monetary level than they are to try to cheat it, right? Yeah. So that hasn't happened yet, but I would not be surprised if that's what happened. Really, the big losers here, the opponents that we should be worried about are the main benefactors of the fiat money printer. So this is the military industrial complex. This is the administrative state that people call it the deep state, right? Which has grown to massive sizes off of the money printer, off of having the ability to deficit spend, having the ability to just print money and pay for anything they want, even though they literally could not pay for it. Bitcoin is a threat to them. It's an end to the party. It's an end to that system. Those are the people that worry me. It's really them. It's really the and not everyone in government is bad, but the people that benefit from the money printer, you're attacking their living, even though they're stealing from everyone else through currency debasement. Yeah. You are attacking their source of wealth in a way. And those are the people that are going to be the most ferocious. I still think we'll win regardless because the incentives are better and because Bitcoin benefits everyone equally versus their system that benefits a privileged few.
Yeah. After this conversation, I'm going to be talking to Alex Shvetsky, and he talks about the 3-generation theory, like it's going to take 3 generations for Bitcoin adoption to happen. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin winning and becoming like the world's monetary unit? Is it going to take, 60 odd years, or are we going to see it in the next couple of cycles? Do we go through hyper Bitcoinization shortly? I know it's anybody's guess.
Yeah, Fetsky's a good friend of mine. Tell him I say what's up. the most toxic, I would say one of the most toxic in a good way Bitcoiners. Yeah, so the 3 generation cycle is interesting. It was originally talked about by this guy named Yuri Bezmenov. And Yuri Bezmenov was he was a spy for the Soviet Union who ran away to the United States. He sought asylum in the United States, and they started doing interviews. One of the interviews that he did was with Edward Griffin, who was the author of the book The Creature from Jekyll Island. In that interview, he talks about ideological subversion and how that was the primary tool used by the KGB, which was the Soviet Union equivalent of the CIA, to demoralize a nation and change the ideological bent of a nation. And he said it himself, it takes 3 generations to do that. And the reason it takes 3 generations to do that is because you have to indoctrinate the younger generations with the ideologies of in what he was bringing up, Marxist Leninism. In the case of Bitcoin, it's the Bitcoin ethos, right? That's something that's already happening in El Salvador. Nayib Bukele is pushing children to be educated on Bitcoin. They also made Seyfedin Amous the presidential economic advisor, an Austrian economist. So that's freaking awesome. And I also had a conversation with the CEO of Start9, Matt Hill, and he said the same thing. He says it's going to take probably like a 3-generational, it's going to be probably like a 3-generational thing. So I do believe it, based on history and based on what's happened, I think that it's definitely a generational thing for sure. And then there's the concept of the fiat matrix, right? So if you have grown up in a fiat society where you have grown up with dollars, you've grown up with opening a bank account, you're used to operating your bank account, even though on a technical level, it might actually be easier to use Bitcoin. If you've been using a bank account in the traditional fiat system for decades, you have to unlearn the things that you were taught about money. And the older you get, the more you have to unlearn and the harder it becomes to unlearn it, right? Versus if you're a child and you initially get exposed to just using Bitcoin, you're looking at the fiat system, the banking system, you're like, that is crazy. Like, what do you mean I have to like go up to a branch and give them my ID and sign all this paperwork? I can't just download a wallet. What the F is going on?
Yeah.
Right. So, I do believe in the theory. I think it's going to be a little bit faster than people anticipate, just because in developing countries, the global South, like Jeff Booth says, people are going to adopt Bitcoin out of necessity because of their unstable fiat currencies. Like Argentina is currently dealing with 100% inflation. People over there, I know they're adopting a lot of stable coins, but they're also adopting Bitcoin. They're adopting Bitcoin out of necessity rather than for ideological or speculative reasons like we're adopting Bitcoin in the West.
Yeah. And are they both beneficial? I actually want to dive into a little bit of your story shortly, but just to tie this all together, is it helpful that, like us here in the West, we're jumping in here for potentially reasons of greed? Like, obviously, there's I guess you come up for the number go up technology and then you stay here for the revolution. But for the people that are using it out of necessity, is it beneficial that people here in the West are jumping and speculating, pushing the price up and making it volatile? Is that helping the people that are using it because they need to?
In the long term, no. In the short term, possibly.
Fair. So, Nico, if you don't mind, I'm pretty interested in your story. I was reading this article that you put up about mining with helicopters, which seemed a bit bizarre. Also, I'd like to dive into your upbringing. You did talk a little bit about drug abuse, hidden rock bottom, the GFC, but I only want you to go as deep as you're willing to go. And how did all of those events lead you to where you are now with Bitcoin, like from going from Venezuela, immigrating over to the States?
Yeah, so I back in 2016, I was working a minimum wage job. I was living on my friend's couch he was generous and that's like a tongue twister. Generous
Generous.
enough to let me to let me, stay at his apartment at a very, very cheap, rent, and I slept on his couch basically. And at the time, I was very desperate. I hated where I was at. I had a very privileged upbringing. But the 2008 financial crisis led to a series of events where that my parents went bankrupt, and my parents divorced, and it was just a bunch of crazy stuff that happened, and it was a really, really hard shock for me because you grow up super wealthy, you don't really have a appreciation of money. So losing it all was a big shock. And I lost a lot of my old friends from school and all that stuff. Only, a couple, I could literally count it on my hand, kind of stuck by me. And I had to essentially, learn, how difficult it is to make money in the first place. But I still had that ambition from knowing what it's like to reach economic success. And that's what I see in a lot of people where they are their worst enemies because they don't realize how much you can accomplish just with your mere mindset alone.
Yeah.
So I always had that mindset because of my privileged upbringing and, the values and the things that my parents instilled to me at a very early age. And when I was working at that job, I knew I could do better. I knew that I had I knew that I could reach for more. And my big break came when my cousin from Venezuela came to visit me, my friend's apartment where I was living at. And he said that I asked him, I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm basically mining internet money, making internet money off these machines. And I'm like, what does that mean? And I'm like, look, let me help you. Let me whatever. And he said, yeah, whatever. So I quit my job, borrowed money from my ex-girlfriend, maxed out my credit cards, borrowed money from my mom, jumped on a plane, went to Venezuela. And I approached my uncle and I said, hey, can I work for you? He's like, no, but I'll teach you everything I know. And I just went in all in Bitcoin, bought some miners too. And this was 2016 before the bull market. And my big break happened when at that time, Venezuela was going through this hyper inflationary period where the black market rate was different than the official market rate set by the government. And it created an environment where most people paid you paid the black market rate. That was the actual market rate of the exchange rate. And it created a situation where basically you were mining for free. What happened was that not the government themselves, but people that worked in the government, when we started ordering machines from China at customs, government officials, government workers, would actually start stealing the machines because they started realizing that the machines would make them more just plugging them at home, paying for almost no power because it's the actual electricity rate is black market rate, than they would make in an entire month off of a government salary.
Wow.
So when my uncle would bring these machines from China, they would start going missing. And then the government started to seize the machines, but it was crazy. It was like a drug bust, in a drug bust where they have with the ski masks and the guns, and then they stand in the guns and the drugs in the middle. But imagine that, but with ASICs in the middle, as if these computers were somehow harmful, whatever. It was the most hilarious thing. So it was becoming a security situation where you could not do that anymore.
Wow.
And I used to work in commercial real estate before I got into Bitcoin. And one of my clients at the time, he sent me, he would send me properties and I would send him, I'd see what he had. And one of the properties that he owned was this old pantyhose factory. It was 500,000 square feet. It had giant transformers outside the building that you could see in the pictures. And I called him and I said, hey, what are you doing with this building? And he's like, oh, I'm using it to collect cars, because the guy was very successful, was a wealthier individual.
Yeah.
And I was like, have you ever heard of Bitcoin mining? He's like, no. And I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, by any chance, you know what the power capacity of that facility is? And he's like, Lo, I'll get back to you. To get back to me, he's like 10 megawatts. And I'm like, holy cow.
Let's go.
So
wow.
my big break happened when I was able to convince a lot of my uncle's clients to move those miners to the United States, and specifically South Carolina. And that was my big break. That's where bitvolt started. And it went pretty well until 2018 hit. And 2018 was brutal for miners. And I had to go back to working my fiat job. And 2019, 2020 started, things started picking up again price-wise. I was back to mining. It was making money. I was able to quit my job. And that's when I started Simply Bitcoin. And I started Simply Bitcoin as a like a hobby. I just didn't know how well it was going to be received. And the big break for Simply Bitcoin came when a buddy of mine, Nick Hoffman, who's head of news at Bitcoin Magazine, invited me to speak, which I just talked to you about, invited me to speak at main stage at Bitcoin 2021. And that was Simply Bitcoin's first like kind of exposure. And then over time, it started like gaining popularity and gaining steam. And that led to, I think it was 2022, the end of 2022. I always had a really good relationship with Corey Clipston, which is the CEO of Swan.
Yeah.
And we went back and forth. Originally, he offered me a job. I kind of turned him down because it was the bull market. I was like, no, I don't need it, whatever. Then the bear market hit. I was like, hey, Corey, about that job, let me do the media for you. And I was already kind of doing stuff for them around Pacific Bitcoin. And I was already kind of doing media for Swan. And I always had a close relationship with Corey. And eventually, they gave me an offer. They gave me a job at Swan. And slowly but surely, I started as a producer. And then, I've slowly moved up to just being in charge of their YouTube channel and, all the content that's being dropped there. So, yeah, man, Bitcoin's a hell of a roller coaster. If you put in the proof of work, if you believe, if you work your ass off, eventually, you'll have a good career in Bitcoin. But it requires a ton of proof of work, a ton of belief, and many, many, many days I would say years before expecting to get paid anything. Before you start kind of breaking into the scene.
Yep. I think that's probably a good message for anyone with whatever they're doing. Like a lot of people jump into Bitcoin, they hear about crypto and they want to make it rich quickly. And they don't realize that there's a price of tuition or there's a price of learning, whether it's Bitcoin directly, like working within Bitcoin or within crypto. You can do all these things, but it may take 2, 3, 4 years, and it may cost you a lot of money before you get something back. So I totally agree. Nico, you've interviewed like the best and the brightest minds within Bitcoin, just to name a few, like Alex Gladstein, Parker Lewis, Peter Dunworth, Jeff Ross, James Lavish, Safedina Moose, Jesse Myers, Stephen Lubko, Peter McCormack, Robert Breedlove. The list goes on and on and on, like Caitlin Long, Alex Fetsky, Tone Vase. What are some of the takeaways that you have gained? Because Bitcoin is bringing in literally the smartest minds from everywhere around the world. I just seen they're almost like bugs to a light or a beacon. Bitcoin's that big orange light and everyone's just coming in. What's maybe the consistent theme, and then maybe some individual takeaways from some of these great minds?
Okay. So at first I would definitely say that, I would say that you get a little bit of stage fright. Human beings have that tendency of putting people on a pedestal because they see them on camera or they see them on a screen and they have a big social media following. And I definitely reacted that way first, right?
Yeah.
But when you start realizing and you start building personal relationships with these people, you realize that they're just human beings, like everyone else, um, and they are extremely bright, which is why they've amassed the followings that they had. And it's a privilege to be able to talk with them and have those conversations. And I've really enjoyed a lot of them, because they have such smart and surgically precise, descriptions about particular topics in Bitcoin. But something that I've experienced at Simply, with Simply Bitcoin Live, which is the daily show, we don't usually bring big profile names on Simply Bitcoin Live. We actually put them on Simply Bitcoin IRL to do a dedicated episode on a big name and to give them the full stage.
Yeah.
But on Simply Bitcoin Live, we bring on Bitcoiners from all walks of life. And what's really interesting is some of those stories, man, they might not be big names, they might not be well known, but those stories will blow you the F away, right?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, I love talking to the big guys. They're buddies of mine, like them, they're good people, honest people. I like them a lot. We get along. They have amazing takes. They're extremely intelligent. But it's, I could say the same thing about the everyday Bitcoiner who's not well known, doesn't have a big following. They usually have a fascinating story to tell on how they got to Bitcoin. So, that would be my response to that, really.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that so much. And I guess that's same as my story, not a big name, but the path that each and every single person has varies in so many ways. And it sounds like everyone's sort of coming from, I don't know, I think it's a fight between good and evil, or coming from darkness towards light, towards truth, and whatever that darkness is within anyone else's life. And as they move and they grow through that, like you were saying, or Max Kaiser's saying, is you can't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin changes you. I know occasionally you talk about Clown World, the fiat matrix and stuff, and then just relating back to what we were saying, I've heard you say, like, the more that you go, and this is paraphrasing, but the more you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, the less like Bitcoiners have in common with humans that are still stuck in the fiat matrix. Why do you reckon that is?
Natalie Brunell asked Michael Saylor what worries him. Like what keeps him up at night. And Michael Saylor had a really good answer. And it was, people just don't care about sound money. And I think the bread and circuses, so to speak, are very strong in the Western world. And when people aren't dealing with double-digit inflation, you don't tend to ask questions about the money, because the inflation rate is ever so slight, ever so low, that that people don't seem to notice. So in the developing world, that isn't the case at all, like whatsoever. Like you will know, like you will know, like you will ask questions about the money out of necessity, because you're forced to do so, because you don't have, you have to provide for your family, you have to put food on the table. Yeah. Right. So yeah, man, like it's an interesting dilemma. It's something that we focus a lot on at Swan and at Simply Bitcoin. How do we break out of the Bitcoin echo chamber? How do we get people to start asking questions about what is money? How do we stop getting people distracted with the whole left and right, like, can I curse? Like BS?
Fuck yeah.
And left and right bullshit, And how do we unify people behind a common message?
Yeah.
And you know, and the way that you do that is just by just continuing to pressure and getting people to ask, hey man, it's not right, it's not left. These issues are caused because governments have the ability to print money, therefore debase everyone else's money, especially if you're in the middle and lower classes. Those are where your political woes are coming from. They're not necessarily coming from the opposing political party. And I think governments have done a great job at implementing this divide and conquer strategy where they're like distracting people from, you know, the issue at hand.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been trying to do, you know, this is Safe Dina Moose, the Bitcoin Standard book. That's probably like my biggest orange pill moment. And I kept trying to hand that out to everyone, and they kept giving it back because it's just too much for them. And I believe that everyone that really gets into Bitcoin at some stage is going to read the Bitcoin Standard. But it wasn't really working. Like, I'd talk about it all this much, and they're like, all right, you're some crazy young kid. So I don't know if you've talked to Daz from Beers for Bitcoin, but that's a smaller book. But I found like the easiest way for myself to be able to introduce or provide that first orange pill moment is just talk about like the price of groceries, fuel, electricity here in Australia went up like 20% this year. And if we hit them with the inflation angle, but like the more time you spend in Bitcoin, like you end up just going down like a million rabbit holes and putting in like 10 hours turns into 100, and then those 100 hours turns into thousands of hours very quickly. Is Bitcoin too complicated for the average person to be able to understand? Or how do you see that changing in the space for more mass adoption? Because not everyone's going to put in 100 hours or 1,000 hours to really understand what we are dealing with.
It's actually funny you said that. My girlfriend, she said something very intuitive the other day. She said, she's like, Nico, I know it's the best money. I know everything that you're saying is like right. You know, you won the argument, but she's like, I think people are too stupid. You know, and it's a very blunt, like, kind of statement. But it was extremely intuitive.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's like, it's not that people are stupid or whatnot. It's that going back to the generational thing, like they've lived in this fiat matrix for their entirety of their lives, and they're used to dealing with the bank and a debit card and all this stuff. And like all that stuff is complicated, but they grew up with that, right? They've been told that that is money for so long. We have to go through this process of unlearning. That's why the generational argument is so popular, because it's like, it's a lot easier to, for lack of a better word, indoctrinate younger generations with Bitcoin is money, fiat money is fake money, and them believing that right from an early age, than it is trying to educate people that have lived with government state money the majority of their lives. So yeah, I you know, that's kind of goes back to what Michael Saylor told Natalie Burnell on Coin Stories, like what keeps him up at night. Just people don't care about sound money. Yeah, it's absolutely, I definitely agree, it's a problem. It's what we work at really hard at Simply Bitcoin every single day. And we do so at Swan as well, to try to wake up people to the fact that, hey, look, your economic hardships, your political woes are not caused by the opposing political party, but it's because it's broken money. But it's because the money is broken.
Yeah. I just want to say for everyone watching, I'll put all of Nico's links below. Nico, you do like an incredible job at educating people. I've been watching you for years. You know, so I urge everyone to be able to jump in there and do it. A couple of things within Bitcoin, you know, 100% self-responsibility, not your keys, not your coins, which is, for a Bitcoiner, for you and I, of course, we're going to take possession of our keys, whether it's on like a steel plate or a seed or whatever it is. Bitcoiners will go down that rabbit hole. But for the general public, do you think solutions like collaborative custody can be helpful? or should people really just learn to be able to hold it? Or going back to Blackrock, are you happy for them just to hold the spot Bitcoin ETF?
So the custody problem is an issue. It goes back to the generational thing, goes back to the educational thing.
Yeah.
I think collaborative custody and 2 of 3 model, like that's offered by Unchained, that's offered by Casa. I can't say a lot about it, but let's just say we might potentially be working on something for Swan. I could say that. And there's a lot of really good companies that are trying to make self-custody easy, and collaborative custody is definitely going to be a tool in order to achieve more people taking self-custody, but at the same time, not getting out of their comfort zone, so to speak. So ideally, we would live in a world where everyone just has self-custody of their Bitcoin, but during the transition period where, a lot of the older generation have been lived in the fiat matrix for so long that, that it's very difficult for them to rewire their brain. Look, that analogy comes from the matrix. It sounds so cliche, but I keep bringing up the fiat matrix, and there's a scene in the matrix where Morpheus shows Neo the construct and shows Neo that, hey, you've been living in a fake world this entire time. Neo freaks out. He's like, this is crazy. They take him out of the construct. They pull the thing out of his head, and he's like, holy crap, this is real. And then he just throws up and he just passes out. The following scene, he wakes up and Morpheus is standing up by his bedside, and he tells Neo, and he apologizes. He's like, Neo, I want to apologize. We don't pull people out of the matrix after they're past a certain age because it's too much for their mind to handle. And it's such an appropriate analogy to this. It's not necessary because there's 60-year-old Bitcoiners that I know. There's 70-year-old Bitcoiners that I know that they're technically, they can pick it up. They're savvy as hell, and they take self-custody. They're hardcore Bitcoiners.
Like
so it's not an ageist argument. Yeah, it's not an ageist argument. I'm not trying to make that argument at all. I'm just saying that, like, for a younger person who doesn't even get exposed to the fiat system, period, they go straight to Bitcoin. Yeah. They don't have to unlearn anything. It's like people that grew up with the internet are very different than people who people that grew up with the internet are very, very different than people who adopted the internet as an older adult, because they are internet natives. Like they've never known a world without the internet. Like it's second nature to them. So yeah, man, that's like the that's the argument. That's the analogy that I make, man, is that, like, I think as time progresses, you'll see more and more adoption, more and more self-custody, but I think it's going to take a long time for all of this to play out.
Cool. Just briefly, like, wrapping up this thought, between now and then, like, people are just going to grow up. Bitcoin will, to them, always would have been. They're just going to see it. But does that discount that we're still going to have these cycles and we're going to go through price hikes and stuff? Or is it just going to be flat? Maybe we go sideways for the next 60 years until we get mass adoption price-wise? What do you think happens between now and then?
I don't know. I think Bitcoin is designed to go up forever because of its infinity divided by 21 million. Yeah. And I also think that the halvings cause this supply shock, and that takes away downward sell pressure, because those miners have to sell Bitcoin to pay for operations, and all of a sudden that downward sell pressure gets cut in half every 4 years. Now, I know the argument gets made that like, okay, but it's less Bitcoin that's being sold, but in a way, the amount of money that miners make continues to make all-time highs every single year. So you're talking about millions upon millions of dollars as downward sell pressure, you know, every single year, that is being pushed on Bitcoin. When the halving comes around, that gets cut in half, right? So it literally causes, it's a catalyst for the price to go up. There's an argument that is being made essentially that, that is going to have less of an effect. I agree with that. There's also the diminishing returns theory. I agree with that as well. It's a lot harder for Bitcoin to go from 26,000 to 100,000 than it was for Bitcoin to go from $1 to $4.
Yeah.
Right. That's the law of big numbers. It's just harder. Right.
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme of things, Bitcoin is designed to go up forever. If Bitcoin's success is binary, this either goes up forever or it goes to zero. Like that's the whole point of it. I can't put a timeline on it.
Yeah.
I think last halving, we should have hit 100K, but the China ban happened.
Yeah.
Right. And that put a lot of downward pressure on the price because a lot of those miners had to sell Bitcoin. So I can't tell you like specific price targets and price dates and whatever, but Bitcoin is designed to go up forever. Saylor said it himself. It's going up forever, Laura. Greg Foss says it's math.
Yeah.
I believe that as well. And I've lived it too.
Yeah, you did a really good interview with Tone Vase talking about that as well, the cycle where it should have gone to 100,000. So I'll put that in the description for everyone. Couple of questions for you, Nico. With bitvolt there, you're hosting mining. Do you mind diving into what you're doing there? Can the general public get involved with the mining operation, or is it all closed? If you can just sort of tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so if you want to mine Bitcoin, you want to host with me, just go through my website and, we'll send you more information. And we are planning to expand later on this year. We found a very good site in the northern United States with very, very cheap electricity. So yeah, man, that's pretty much it. Just reach out to me, over my website and, we'll chat and we'll discuss.
Yeah. Awesome. And at that site, are you still using helicopters to power these mining rigs, or that's in the past?
No. And that like that was like an experiment to see if we could pull it off.
Did it work?
It wasn't like a, let's just say it wasn't a good idea. But we wanted to just kind of give it a go to see if it would work. And we kind of jiggy rigged it and whatnot. But don't use helicopters to mine Bitcoin. I'll say that.
Bloody boys and their toys. Nico, I've put all your links below, but a couple of final thoughts. What books would you recommend for everyone? It sounds like you're very, very well read. They can either be Bitcoin related or not. What are some of the key life-changing books, articles, bits of information, videos?
Yeah. So the Bitcoin standard, the fiat standard is great. Personally, recommend 48 Laws of Power, the Bible, obviously. I mean, like you would think that I'm like this super well-read Bitcoin person who really like orange pilled me is Andreas Antonopoulos.
Yeah.
And his lectures. That's really, I spent hours and hours watching his lectures because that was really the only type of Bitcoin content that was around when I got into Bitcoin. And of course, the legendary Max Kaiser. I love video. I'm a video guy. So I would watch their lectures on repeat over and over and over again. And I have listened to and read some books. The Sovereign Individual, I highly recommend. And I know Lynn just dropped a new book. Check that out. Safety dropped a new book. Check that out. Yep. Jimmy Song just dropped a new book. Check that out. So yeah, all those, it's just such great reading material. there's so many books. I don't have enough time to get to them, but what really impacted me personally is the the lectures from Andreas.
Yeah.
Those I spent them like so many hours listening to the same lecture on repeat over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. For everyone watching, those videos are very old, but they're evergreen, worth watching. Nico, final thoughts. What would be your departing message for anyone either new to Bitcoin, they've been here for a while, that is here for the revolution, or is beginning to understand that this is freedom technology? What would you say to these people?
Yeah, stay humble, stack sats, stay solvent. If you want to get a job in the space, provide value. Provide value first without zero expectation of compensation. The more proof of work that you show, the more the community will notice that. And eventually that will either lead you to start your own company, or you will, land a job at a Bitcoin company. It is extremely competitive. I won't lie to you. But I've seen it happen 1,000 times. Like, you provide value, whether it's with your tweets or your content or whatever, that will get noticed. And that will eventually open the door. And if you're really good at it, like, it will, I don't want to say guarantee, but it like, you have a really, really good opportunity to either do something or get a job at a company. That's what I would say. If you're trying to get a job in the space, if you're just using Bitcoin as a savings technology, stay humble, stack sats, stay solvent. And yeah, that would be my advice.
Nico, thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully I get to have you back. You're an absolute legend. For everyone watching, I've put everything in Nico's below. One of the best Bitcoin channels out there on YouTube. Make sure you're following him at Simply Bitcoin, also with Swan as well. Thanks so much, Nico. Everyone, be blessed. Peace.